My son called me on a Tuesday evening, which should have told me something right there. He never called on weekdays. Texts, maybe. Short ones. You good? Or talk later. But a real phone call on a Tuesday while I was still in my work clothes heating up soup. That was unusual enough that I turned off the stove before I even answered. Mom. His voice had that careful quality to it, the kind where you can tell someone has been rehearsing. I need to ask you something and I need you to really listen before you react. I sat down at the kitchen table. I'm listening. Vanessa's parents want to meet with a financial advisor next week about the house, and I was thinking, since you co signed the pre approval back in February, it might be better if I just handled this part myself. I didn't say anything right away. I was trying to understand what he was actually asking. You want me to remove my name from the loan application? Not exactly remove, just not be at the meeting. It's a family thing, Mum. Her parents are very traditional. They want it to feel like we're doing this on our own. I looked at my soup. The burner was off, but there was still steam rising from it. You are doing this on your own, I said. Except for the part where my credit score is the reason you got approved. Mom, please don't make this into something. I'm not making it into anything, sweetheart. I'm just clarifying what's actually happening. He went quiet for a moment. Then, it would really mean a lot to me if you could just let us have this. I told him I'd think about it. We hung up. I sat at that table for a long time, watching my soup go cold. Let me go back a little, because none of this came out of nowhere. My son, I'll call him my son because that's what he is, first and last, grew up in a house I'd bought by myself in Dayton, Ohio, after his father and I divorced when he was 6 years old. I worked as a billing coordinator at a medical group for 22 years. I drove a used Camry until the transmission gave out. I packed his lunches every morning. I went to every single one of his baseball games, even the away ones, even the ones 2 hours out when I had early shifts the next day. I am not telling you this to make myself sound noble. I am telling you this because I want you to understand who I am and what I believed I was building. His name is Nathan. He's 33 now. He went to Ohio State on a partial scholarship and worked summers to cover the rest, and I helped where I could, a few hundred here, a car payment there, nothing that broke me, but enough that I always noticed at leaving. When he graduated and got a job in Columbus doing something with supply chain logistics I don't fully understand, I was prouder than I have words for. He met Vanessa about 4 years ago at some work event. She grew up in Dublin, Ohio, the nicer part, where the houses have 3-car garages and the HOA fees alone would have been my grocery budget. Her father owns a chain of flooring supply businesses. Her mother does something with real estate investment. They are not unkind people, from what I saw in the early days. Polished, careful. The kind of people who pick up the check at dinner but make sure you know they're doing it. When Nathan and Vanessa got engaged last spring, I cried in the parking lot of the restaurant after he called to tell me. Happy tears. Real ones. I had imagined this moment since he was small. Not the specific girl, not the specific restaurant, but this feeling of the next chapter beginning. I bought a mother of the groom dress before they'd even set a date. Ivory, with a beaded neckline. I tried it on 3 times in my bedroom just to feel what it would feel like. The house was the thing that started unraveling everything, though at the time I thought it was just a bump. Nathan and Vanessa wanted to buy in Westerville, a suburb north of Columbus, good schools, nice neighborhood, the kind of place you see in real estate ads with golden retrievers in the backyard. The house they found was listed at $387,000. With their combined income, it was manageable, but their credit was thin. Nathan had a student loan he'd been slowly paying down. Vanessa had a car note and 2 credit cards. When they went to their first lender, they came back short on the pre-approval number. Nathan called me. He explained the situation. He asked very carefully and very respectfully if I would be willing to co-sign their mortgage application. My credit score at the time was 791. I had no outstanding debt. I had owned my home outright since 2019. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I went to Columbus and sat at a desk at a credit union and signed paperwork and smiled at a loan officer who shook my hand and called it a real act of love. That's what he said. A real act of love. I thought about that on the drive home. I thought, yes, that's exactly what it is. The pre-approval came through 2 weeks later, $410,000. They made an offer on the house that same weekend. I should tell you about Vanessa's mother, because she matters to this story more than you might expect. Her name is Sylvia. She is 61, same as me, though we are not the same kind of 61. She wears blazers to casual brunches. She has opinions about kitchen hardware that she delivers with the confidence of someone who has never once doubted herself. The first time we met, at a dinner Nathan and Vanessa organized at a restaurant in the short north, she spent the better part of an hour talking about a renovation she'd done to their lake house in Michigan. I listened. I asked questions. I thought we were getting along fine. But I noticed things. The way her eyes moved to my shoes when I walked in. The pause before she laughed at my jokes, just half a beat too long. The time she referred to Dayton, where I live, where Nathan grew up, as more of a starter city. She said it lightly, almost warmly, the way people say things they mean but want to be able to deny later. After that dinner, Nathan told me she'd said she thought I was very sweet. The way he said it, with that slightly apologetic look, I understood that very sweet was not exactly a compliment in Sylvia's vocabulary. It was a category, a placing. I didn't say any of this to Nathan. It wasn't the time. The closing on the house was set for late September. The engagement party was being planned for October. And somewhere in between those two things, the phone calls from my son started getting shorter. Shorter and more careful and more full of the things he wasn't saying. The Tuesday night call was in August. 2 weeks after that, he called again. This time he asked me to consider stepping back from the engagement party planning. His future in-laws wanted to host it at their country club, he said. It was easier logistically. I wouldn't have to worry about any of it. I had already ordered centerpiece supplies. I had a Pinterest board. I had called the woman at our church who does catering on the side. I didn't say any of that. Of course, I said. Whatever is easiest. 2 weeks after that, I got a text from Vanessa, not Nathan. Vanessa, thanking me for being so flexible and letting me know the engagement party would be close family and intimate friends, and that she hoped I understood it would feel overwhelming to include too many people. I read that text 4 times. Then I called my sister Adele, who is 64 and has never once in her life softened a truth to protect someone's feelings. She's telling you you're not invited to your own son's engagement party, Adele said flatly. She said intimate friends and… Gloria, she's telling you you're not invited. I sat with that. Then I said, but my name is still on the mortgage application. Adele was quiet for a moment. Have they closed yet? September 15th. She said it the way she always does when she's thinking something she's deciding whether to say. You might want to talk to someone before then. I want to be very clear about what I did and didn't do in the weeks that followed, because I am aware that some people, when they hear a story like this, want there to be a villain who knew exactly what they were doing. I don't know exactly what Nathan knew. I don't know how much Sylvia had shaped the situation before he understood what he was agreeing to. I know what happened, not always why. What I did was call the credit union. I asked them very calmly what my options were as a co-signer on a pending mortgage application. The loan officer I spoke with, a different one this time, a woman named Ms. Carpenter, who was brisk and efficient in the way I found comforting, explained that prior to closing, a co-signer could request to be removed from the application, which would require the primary borrowers to either requalify independently or find a replacement co-signer. It was not a simple process. It was not a pleasant process. But it was, she said, entirely within my rights. I told her I needed a few days to think. I spent those days doing something I hadn't done in a while, being very honest with myself, not about what I felt, because I knew what I felt. Hurt, mostly. That particular kind of hurt that comes when you realize the version of yourself that exists in someone else's mind is much smaller than the version you carry. But feelings weren't the whole thing. I had to think practically. If I stayed on the loan, I was legally responsible for a $387,000 mortgage in a house I'd been quietly uninvited from. If Nathan and Vanessa ever defaulted, or if something went wrong between them, my credit, my retirement, my safety net was tied to the outcome. I had no equity stake. I have no guest room designated for my visits. I had a signature on a document and a mother of the groom dress hanging in my closet. I also thought about Nathan. What it meant that he had let this happen. Whether he was a man who didn't see what was being done, or a man who saw and looked away because looking away was easier. Both versions of that broke my heart. But one of them I could forgive faster than the other. I called Miss Carpenter back on a Thursday morning in early September. I told Nathan the same evening. I called him, just like he'd called me on that Tuesday. I waited until I knew he'd be home from work. I heated up coffee, sat at my kitchen table again. The same table, the same chair, and I called my son and I told him that I had contacted the credit union and begun the process of removing my name from the cosign on his mortgage application. The silence that followed was the longest I have ever heard from him. Longer than any argument we'd ever had. Longer than the silence after his father moved out. Longer than the day he called me from college to say he'd failed a midterm and didn't know if he could do it. Mom. His voice had changed completely. The rehearsed quality was gone. Mom, the closing is in 11 days. I know. We can't requalify in 11 days. The rate lock expires. We'd lose the house. I know, sweetheart. Why are you doing this? And here is where I want to be careful, because I did not say everything I could have said. I did not bring up the engagement party text. I did not mention Sylvia and her blazers and her lake house and her way of making me feel like a starter city. I did not perform my own hurt for him. I said, because I realized I'd made a commitment I wasn't fully informed about. Not the financial part, I understood that. The relationship part. What it means to be tied to something this significant when I don't know what place I have in your life anymore. I need you to help me understand that, Nathan, before I sign anything else. Another long silence. Then, Mom, Vanessa's dad is going to lose his mind. That may be, I said, but I'm asking about you and me right now. What happened over the next 8 days is hard to explain quickly, so I'll try to explain it honestly. Nathan came to Dayton by himself. He drove 2 hours on a Saturday morning and he sat in my kitchen, this same kitchen, this table that has heard so much of our life together, and we talked for almost 4 hours. I made coffee and then I made more coffee, and at some point I made sandwiches because you have to eat even when things are hard. He told me things I had suspected and some things I hadn't. He told me that Sylvia had made comments, more than a few, about wanting him and Vanessa to start fresh, without old family patterns. He said Vanessa had repeated those comments. He said he had convinced himself it was just a phase, that once the wedding was over and they were settled, it would normalize. Did you believe that? I asked. He looked at his sandwich for a long time. I wanted to, he said. I nodded. I understand the wanting. I've done my share of it. He also told me, and this one I had not known, that his father-in-law, Vanessa's father, had told him early on that a man whose mother still co-signs his loan isn't really standing on his own 2 feet. He'd said it over golf, Nathan told me. Casual, like it was just an observation. I thought about that for a moment. He said that, I said, after his daughter benefited from the cosign to get the pre-approval she needed. Nathan looked at me. Yeah, Mom, he did. I let that sit between us. What I said next surprised even me. I didn't yell, I wasn't cold. I reached across the table and I covered my son's hand with mine, and I said, I need you to decide what kind of man you're going to be in this marriage. Not for me, for you. Because the version of this where I disappear quietly and you tell yourself I was just difficult, that version has a long tail, sweetheart. It will show up in ways you're not expecting. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he asked me what I needed. I told him. I needed to be at the wedding, not as a guest who needed to be managed, as his mother. I needed to meet Vanessa's family with my head up, not be introduced as a footnote. I needed him to stop allowing my existence to be framed as a liability, and I needed, in writing, to be added as an interested party to the mortgage documents, not as a cosigner any longer, but acknowledged, protected, in case things ever needed to be untangled. He called Vanessa from my driveway. I don't know everything that was said. I could see him through the window, standing next to his car, one hand pressed to the top of his head, the way he's done since he was small when he's working through something hard. He came back inside after 20 minutes. She wants to talk to her parents first, he said. That's fine, I said. So do I. I called Adele that night. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which is unusual for her. So you're going to stay on the loan? She asked when I was done. I haven't decided yet, I said. But you're going to the wedding? Yes, I said. I'm going to the wedding. She laughed then, a real one. Good. I was worried you were going to let them just. She stopped. What did it feel like when you called the bank? I thought about that. Like standing up straight for the first time in a long time, I said. My back hurt a little, but it felt right. The conversation with Sylvia happened about a week later. Vanessa arranged it, coffee, just the two of us, at a place in Dublin that I think was chosen because it was on her side of the city. I wore a blazer. I want you to know that. I went and bought a blazer. She was already there when I arrived. She looked, I want to say surprised, but that's not exactly it. Alert. Like she'd expected me to be a slightly different thing and was recalibrating. We ordered, we made small talk about the neighborhood, and then I set down my cup and I said calmly with my hands folded on the table, I'd like us to talk honestly about what's been happening. She started with the party. She said it was about managing the guest count. I listened, then I said, I think we both know that's not what it was about. She looked at me for a long moment. I said, I'm not here to make your family uncomfortable. I'm not here to cause problems at the wedding. I raised my son to be a good man, and I think, based on the fact that your daughter chose him, that you agree. But I want to be clear with you. The way I think women our age can be clear with each other, I am not going anywhere. I am his mother. That's not a role that gets retired. She picked up her coffee. She didn't respond right away. When she did, she said something I didn't expect. My own mother-in-law, she said slowly, made the first 15 years of my marriage very difficult. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. I'm not her. She looked at me again, a long look. And then, very slightly, she nodded. It wasn't a warm moment. It wasn't a turning point in some movie. But it was real. Two 61-year-old women at a table, deciding not to make things worse. I'll take that over a lot of things. The closing happened on September 19th, 4 days late, because rescheduling required coordination. I don't fully understand. I remained on the loan. Nathan and I agreed to terms we had drafted with a family law attorney in Columbus. Nothing dramatic, just a letter of understanding about my role, my protections, what would happen if the loan needed to be restructured. It cost me $350, and it was the best money I spent that year. The engagement party happened in October at Sylvia and her husband's country club. I was there. I sat at the table nearest the entrance, and I talked to Vanessa's aunt from Cleveland for an hour about her garden, and it was genuinely a lovely conversation. Adele sat next to me and made me laugh twice. Nathan gave a small toast. He talked about becoming someone his family could be proud of. He looked at Vanessa when he said it, and then he looked at me. Just for a moment. But I saw it. The wedding is set for June. The dress still fits. I tried it on last week just to check. I am 61 years old. I have worked hard for everything I have. I know the difference between keeping the peace and disappearing. And I have learned, later than I should have, that those two things are not the same. My son asked me, near the end of that long Saturday in my kitchen, whether I was angry with him. I thought about it honestly before I answered. Not anymore, I said. I was, but I think you were scared, and I think you made some choices that scared people make, and I think you're trying to make them right now. That's what I choose to see. He put his arms around me at the door when he left. He held on for a few seconds longer than usual. I stood on my porch and watched his car until I couldn't see it anymore. Then I went inside and finished my coffee and called Adele, and didn't cry until after I hung up. That's the whole story. Or the whole story so far. I've been thinking about what it actually costs to stay silent when you shouldn't. Not the dramatic kind of silence, not the silence of someone being noble or patient. The other kind, the kind where you convince yourself you're keeping the peace when really you're just slowly making yourself smaller so other people feel more comfortable. I did that for a while with Nathan. I told myself it was love, and some of it was, but some of it was fear, dressed up as love. And I think it's worth being honest about that. What I've come to understand, sitting in this kitchen that has seen more of my life than any other room in any house I've ever lived in, is that actions don't disappear just because no one names them. Nathan signed documents that connected my financial life to his. That was real. Vanessa's text about the engagement party was real. Sylvia's country club and her careful eyes and her way of measuring people, all of that was real, whether or not anyone ever said it out loud. Reality doesn't wait for permission to be real. And what I did, calling that credit union, sitting in that chair asking Miss Carpenter what my rights were, that was real too. Not as punishment, not to cause damage, just as the natural, honest consequence of choices that had already been made on all sides. I had co-signed a loan in good faith. That good faith had not been matched. The only question left was what I was going to do about it. I think the hardest thing for a person to learn, and I was 61 years old before I really learned it, is that protecting yourself is not the same as being cruel. Those two things can feel identical when you're in the middle of them, especially if the person on the other end of your decision is someone you love. Nathan looked at me across my kitchen table that Saturday like I'd done something unforgivable, and I had to sit with that look and not let it undo me. That takes something. I don't have a clean word for what it takes, but it has to do with knowing the difference between your guilt and your responsibility and not confusing one for the other. Adele asked me once whether I thought Nathan was a good man who'd made bad choices or something else entirely. I told her what I still believe, that most people are not their worst moments. Nathan was scared of losing something he wanted. He made choices that scared people make. That's not an excuse. It doesn't make the hurt smaller, but it's the truth, and the truth is what I had to keep coming back to when everything else felt like noise. What I want for him, even now, even after all of it, is that he becomes a man who doesn't need to make himself look better by making me look smaller. That's the work ahead of him. It has nothing to do with the house or the mortgage or any piece of paper. It has to do with what kind of person he decides to be when things get complicated. I know what kind of person I decided to be. I stood up straight. My back hurt a little, but I stood up.